I'll pay for her. A calm voice cut through the chaos, silencing the sneers in a crowded coffee shop. Picture this. Willow, a poised black CEO, stands humiliated as her card declines, her blouse stained by a stranger's spilled coffee, the barista's disdain palpable. Then James, a security guard, steps forward with a simple act of kindness that sparks an unforgettable journey. Where are you listening from today? Drop it in the comments. What do you think happens next? Will this moment fade or change their lives forever? Stick around to find out how one coffee brews a story of courage and connection. If you love heartwarming tales, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for our latest videos. Share where you're watching from and your predictions below. Let's dive into kindness over coffee. You won't want to miss the ending. The grind, tucked at the base of Pinnacle Tower, pulsed with the frenetic energy of a city waking up. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted beans, steam hissing from espresso machines like a dragon's breath, and the clatter of cups formed a jagged symphony. Baristas shouted names. Latte for Michael. Cappuccino for Sarah, as professionals in tailored suits jostled for their morning fix. Into this chaos stepped Willow Thompson, a 30-year-old black CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, her presence both commanding and understated. Her long jet-black hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light like polished obsidian, framing a crisp white blouse that hugged her frame and navy trousers that whispered power with every step. Her beauty was undeniable, striking yet unassuming, a quiet elegance that didn't demand attention but held it effortlessly. She navigated the crowd with purpose, her phone in one hand, a leather-bound planner tucked under her arm, her eyes scanning emails even as she joined the line. At the counter, she flashed a polite smile, her voice smooth but distracted. One matcha latte, please. The white barista, a young woman with a tight ponytail and a name tag reading Brittany, barely looked up. $6.25, she said, her tone clipped, as if Willow were just another order to dispatch. Willow tapped her card against the reader, expecting the familiar beep. Instead, the machine flashed red. Declined. Her brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. She tried again, pressing the card firmly. Declined. The word blinked like a taunt. Heat crept up her neck, her pulse quickening. She rummaged through her sleek leather satchel, fingers searching for her wallet, side pocket, main compartment, nothing. The realization hit like a cold wave. She'd left it in her office, 28 floors up. I'm so sorry, Willow said, her voice steady despite the embarrassment blooming in her chest. I forgot my wallet. Can you hold the order? I'll run upstairs and be right back. Brittany's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing with a glint of disdain, as if Willow's request were a personal offense. We don't hold orders during rush hour, she snapped, glancing at the growing line behind her, a silent accusation that Willow was wasting everyone's time. The air grew heavier, the crowd's impatience pressing in like a physical force. A man in line, middle-aged with a smug grin and a cheap suit, leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. Maybe stick to cash next time, sweetheart. The word landed like a slap, and Willow's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into her palm. Before she could respond, the man gestured wildly, his elbow knocking his coffee cup off the counter. Dark liquid arced through the air, splashing across Willow's pristine blouse. The stain spread like ink on snow, a jagged wound against the white fabric. The man shrugged, his oops laced with indifference, his eyes glinting with something uglier than carelessness. Whispers rippled through the line, some amused, others uncomfortable, but no one moved to help. Willow froze, her breath shallow, the weight of every stare pinning her in place. Her mind raced. Say something, walk away, don't let them see you crack. But before she could act, a voice cut through the tension, calm yet unyielding, like a blade slicing fog. It's just coffee. Let's not make a scene. The crowd parted slightly, and there he was, James Carter, a security guard in his early 30s, standing tall with an easy confidence that belied his worn jeans and navy polo. His blonde hair was neatly cropped, his blue eyes steady, a security badge clipped to his belt glinting under the fluorescent lights. He stepped to the counter, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm, and raised his phone to the reader. The payment chimed through, a soft note of resolution. Brittany's scowl softened, but she said nothing, her hands already moving to the next order. James turned to Willow, holding out her matcha latte, the steam curling like a promise. Here, he said, his voice gentle but firm. No big deal. She took the cup, her fingers brushing the warm paper, her mind still reeling. You didn't have to, she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. Let me pay you back. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips, disarming in its sincerity. If it were me, you'd do the same. Noticing the stain on her blouse, he paused, pulling a clean napkin from his pocket. May I? He asked, his tone respectful, waiting for her nod. She gave it, and he stepped closer, careful, precise, dabbing at the coffee near her collar, his touch light, never crossing the invisible line of her space. Mostly gone, he said, stepping back, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, unguarded moment. Thank you, Willow murmured, clutching the cup, the warmth grounding her. What's your name? He glanced over his shoulder as he moved toward the exit, the crowd swallowing him. James, he called, and then he was gone, the glass door swinging shut behind him. Willow stood still, the napkin crumpled in her hand, the latte's heat seeping through her fingers. Around her the shop buzzed again, orders shouted, machines hissing. But something had shifted. The weight of the moment lingered, not in the stain or the sneers, but in a stranger's kindness, offered without expectation, a single act that felt like the first note of a song she hadn't known she needed to hear. The 28th floor conference room of Pinnacle Tower was a study in sleek precision, glass walls reflecting the city's skyline, a long mahogany table gleaming under recessed lights, and the faint hum of a coffee machine in the corner. Willow Thompson sat at the head, her posture regal yet tense, her long black hair pulled into a low bun, the morning's chaos a distant echo. Papers fanned out before her. Resumes for Pinnacle Innovations' new AI-driven logistics initiative, a project that could redefine the company's future. As CEO, she'd insisted on personally vetting the shortlist, distrusting the impersonal algorithms HR favored. The stakes were astronomical. 5 new markets, billions in revenue, and a legacy she'd fought to build as a Black woman in a world quick to dismiss her. Yet as she scanned the resumes, a restlessness gnawed at her. Too many perfect credentials, too many buzzwords, synergy, disruptive, scalable, but no spark, no grit. She flipped through the accepted pile, her fingers moving mechanically. Ivy League degrees, polished cover letters, predictable trajectories. Her mind wandered, unbidden, to the coffee shop, to a man named James whose quiet kindness had cut through her humiliation like a lifeline. She shook her head, refocusing, but the resumes blurred into sameness. Frustrated, she reached for the rejection pile, a stack HR had deemed unfit. The top folder caught her eye, a red slash across its cover. James Carter. Her breath hitched. The name, unassuming yet vivid, pulled her back to the memory of a security guard's steady gaze. She opened the folder, her pulse quickening, as if she'd stumbled onto a secret. The resume was sparse, almost defiant in its brevity. James Carter, Senior Systems Engineer, Next Tech Solutions. 5 years of experience, multiple commendations for optimizing complex networks and leading teams through high-stakes projects. Then a stark line. Personal leave, 3 years. No explanation, no embellishment. A handwritten note in the margin, in HR's neat script, read, employment gap, insufficient justification. Discard. Willow's brow furrowed. Nextech was a titan, its engineers coveted for their precision and innovation. Why had James, with such credentials, been cast aside so swiftly? She leaned back, tapping a pen against her knee, the room's silence amplifying her curiosity. She turned to her laptop, fingers flying across the keys as she accessed Pinnacle's internal database. Nothing beyond the resume. She widened her search. LinkedIn, public records, news archives. Her screen flickered, and an article from a local paper loaded, its headline a gut punch. Tech engineer loses family in devastating crash. The photo showed a younger James, his face etched with grief, standing at a memorial with a single white rose in his hand. The story was brief but searing. A freeway collision, his wife and daughter gone, his career abandoned weeks later. Willow's throat tightened, her breath shallow. The 3-year gap wasn't a flaw. It was a scar, worn with a dignity that refused pity. She returned to the resume, rereading the final line. A small note in James's own words. Seeking to re-enter tech with purpose, not pity. The simplicity of it struck her, a quiet rebellion against a world that demanded explanations for pain. She imagined HR skimming the page, their red pens slashing through his story without a second glance. Anger flared in her chest, not at them, but at the system that reduced people to checkboxes. She'd built Pinnacle to be different, to see potential where others saw risk. And here, in this discarded folder, was a man who'd chosen stillness over chaos, who'd survived the unthinkable and dared to start again. Willow picked up her pen, its weight heavy in her hand. She crossed out the red discard, the ink bleeding slightly, and wrote in bold, deliberate strokes, Priority Review, Direct Interview with the CEO. The words felt like a vow, not just to James, but to herself. She leaned forward, pressing the intercom on her desk. Emily, she said, her voice steady but charged with resolve, pull all HR notes on James Carter. Schedule a one-on-one with me, no panel, just us. Emily's voice crackled through, hesitant. He's in the rejection pile, Ms. Thompson. Willow's lips curved, not quite a smile. Not anymore. She closed the folder, her fingers lingering on the name. The city buzzed beyond the glass, a million lives rushing toward unknown ends. But in this moment, Willow felt anchored. She didn't know James Carter, not yet, but she knew what it was to be underestimated, to carry a weight others couldn't see. The resume in her hands was more than paper. It was a story, half told, and she was determined to read the rest. The conference room's lights hummed softly, the world outside indifferent, but inside something had shifted, a decision that felt like the first step towards something greater. The corner office on the 28th floor of Pinnacle Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that glittered like a constellation of ambition. Willow Thompson sat behind a sleek obsidian desk, her long black hair swept into an elegant chignon, her tailored navy blazer a sharp contrast to the soft morning light spilling across her notes. As CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, she was accustomed to commanding rooms, but today her pulse thrummed with an unfamiliar anticipation. The folder before her bore a single name in bold type, James Carter. The air held a quiet electricity, as if the room itself knew this meeting was no ordinary interview. James Carter stepped through the door, his presence both unassuming and arresting. His security uniform, navy polo, worn jeans, badge clipped to his belt, seemed out of place against the office's polished opulence. Yet he carried himself with a steady grace, his broad shoulders squared, his blue eyes alert but guarded. He was taller than Willow remembered, his blonde hair neatly cropped, his face etched with a quiet strength that seemed to absorb the room's intensity rather than reflect it. She gestured to the leather chair across from her, her voice warm but measured. Please sit. He obeyed, his movements deliberate, his hands resting lightly on his knees, betraying no hint of nervousness. Willow leaned forward, her fingers brushing the folder's edge, her gaze locking onto his. I imagine you're wondering why you're here, she began, her tone carrying the weight of someone who'd earned every inch of her authority. Beyond any incidental encounters, a faint smile flickered across James's lips, a spark of recognition in his eyes, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he nodded, his voice low and even. It crossed my mind. The simplicity of his response, devoid of pretense, caught her off guard, like a stone skipping across still water. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the sparse resume as if seeing it for the first time. James Carter, she read aloud, her voice deliberate, former senior systems engineer at Nextech Solutions, 5 years of experience, multiple commendations, then a 3-year gap marked only as personal leave. Now a part-time security guard. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, her gaze lifting to meet his. You didn't mention any of that in your application. Why? James didn't flinch, his expression as steady as granite. Most people stop reading after the gap, he said, his voice carrying a quiet conviction, not defensive, but resolute. Willow tilted her head, her curiosity sharpening like a blade. And if they didn't? If someone read to the end? He shrugged lightly, a gesture that belied the weight of his words. They'd see someone rebuilding, on their own terms. The answer landed like a spark, igniting something in Willow's chest, a recognition of a man who'd chosen dignity over excuses. She leaned back, her fingers interlacing, her mind racing. Next Tech was no small player. Its engineers were the backbone of cutting-edge systems, and James had thrived there. Yet here he was, applying for an entry-level role, his past a shadow he neither flaunted nor hid. You're overqualified for the positions we posted, she said, her tone probing. Why aim so low? Why not wait for the executive doors to reopen? His eyes met hers unflinching, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink, the city beyond the windows fading into silence. Because I don't want pity, he said, his voice soft but unyielding, like iron wrapped in velvet. I want purpose, a fresh start I've earned, not one handed to me out of guilt or curiosity. The words were a declaration, raw and unadorned, and they struck Willow with a force she hadn't anticipated. She'd interviewed countless candidates, polished, rehearsed, eager to impress, but none had spoken with such unvarnished clarity. Her throat tightened, not with sympathy, but with respect, a rare emotion in a world of corporate games. Willow's gaze softened, though her posture remained poised. What surprised me most, she said, her voice lowering, is how you handled yourself in a moment of need. You didn't linger, didn't ask for anything, didn't even wait for thanks. James's smile was faint, almost self-deprecating. It wasn't about thanks, he said, his eyes steady, holding hers with a quiet intensity that made the air hum. She nodded, her mind made up, though her heart still raced with the audacity of what she was about to do. She reached into her desk drawer, pulling out a thick envelope, its weight a testament to the decision within. She slid it across the desk, her fingers lingering on the paper. This isn't about obligations, she said, her voice firm but warm. It's about what Pinnacle needs. James opened the envelope, his expression unreadable as he scanned the offer letter, not for an entry-level role, but for lead systems consultant on the company's flagship logistics project, a position that could shape billions in revenue. His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise breaking his calm, but he quickly regained his composure. I'll accept, he said, his voice steady, though a trace of emotion threaded through it. He paused, a glint of humor sparking in his eyes. On one condition. Willow raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What's that? He leaned forward slightly, his smile softening the room's edges. I pay for your next coffee. The unexpected levity broke the tension, and Willow laughed, a genuine sound that echoed in the glass-walled space. Deal, she said, extending her hand. He shook it, his grip firm but gentle, sealing a partnership that felt like the beginning of something uncharted. As James stood to leave, Willow watched him, the city's pulse faint beyond the windows. The interview was over, but the moment lingered, a quiet promise of what could be when two people saw each other, not as titles or resumes, but as truths waiting to be uncovered. The 24th floor of Pinnacle Tower buzzed with a polished intensity, its open-plan office a hive of clicking keyboards, muted phone calls, and the soft glow of monitors casting shadows on glass partitions. James Carter, newly minted technical strategy consultant, stepped off the elevator, his ID badge, now bearing his elevated title, feeling heavier than the security pass he'd worn just weeks ago. His navy blazer, simple but well-fitted, replaced the worn polo of his past role, yet he moved with the same quiet confidence, his blonde hair neatly cropped, his blue eyes scanning the space with a blend of alertness and restraint. The air carried the scent of cedar from sleek diffusers, a stark contrast to the coffee shop's roasted chaos. But the stakes here were infinitely higher. Pinnacle Innovations' AI-driven logistics initiative was a billion-dollar gamble, and James was no longer an outsider. He was a player in a game where every move was scrutinized. He settled at his corner desk, a modest station amidst the sea of chrome and glass, his monitor already alive with data models and system maps. Whispers trailed him like a faint breeze, barely audible but persistent. "The security guard?" a junior analyst murmured near the coffee station, her voice laced with skepticism. "Heard the CEO handpicked him. Must have charmed her." Her colleague, a wiry coder with a half-tucked shirt, smirked. "From badges to boardrooms? That's a leap." James caught the words but let them slide, his focus locked on a schematic of the company's logistics platform. He'd spent nights dissecting its code, tracing inefficiencies like a detective hunting clues. The gossip was noise. The work was his truth. The conference room later that morning was a crucible of egos and expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that sprawled in relentless ambition, while the long table hosted a dozen sharp-suited strategists, IT heads, and project leads, their laptops open like shields. Willow Thompson sat at the back, her presence understated yet magnetic, her navy pantsuit crisp, her long black hair pulled into a low bun. She hadn't announced her attendance, and her silence drew curious glances, but her eyes, sharp, observant, missed nothing. James stood at the front, a projector screen behind him glowing with a complex network diagram. His blazer hung neatly, no tie, his posture relaxed but poised, like a man who'd faced worse than a room of skeptics. He cleared his throat, the sound slicing through the room's low hum. "I've analyzed our logistics platform," he began, his voice steady, carrying the calm authority of someone who'd built systems from the ground up. He clicked the remote, and the screen zoomed into a data sync channel, red lines highlighting bottlenecks. "We're losing $350,000 annually due to redundant syncs across 3 nodes." Heads lifted, eyebrows arching. He clicked again, revealing a streamlined model. "With predictive caching and a unified API, we can cut that by 80% in 4 months." The numbers hung in the air, stark and undeniable, like a challenge issued in a duel. Silence followed, thick with calculation. Then a senior IT lead, a man with silver hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, leaned forward. "That's ambitious," he said, his tone edged with doubt. "What's the failover risk?" James didn't hesitate. "Minimal. The model uses redundant microservices to ensure uptime. I've stress-tested it. 99.9% reliability." Another voice, a strategist with a clipped accent, fired off. "And the implementation cost?" James's response was swift, precise. $1.2 million up front, recouped in savings within 18 months. The questions came faster now, technical, probing, some tinged with hostility, but James met each with clarity, his answers grounded in a deep well of expertise that silenced doubters one by one. The room shifted, skepticism giving way to curiosity, then respect. Analysts scribbled notes. IT heads exchanged glances. Willow remained still, her expression unreadable, but her eyes tracked James's every move, a faint spark of pride flickering within them. He didn't grandstand, didn't chase applause. His focus was the work, not the spotlight, and that restraint only amplified his impact. As he concluded, clicking the screen to a summary slide, the room exhaled, the tension replaced by a murmur of acknowledgement. A junior coder clapped, hesitant at first, then others joined, the sound building into a genuine, if restrained, ovation. James gathered his notes, his face impassive, but inside something stirred, a sense of ground reclaimed, of a self he'd thought lost. He glanced at Willow, their eyes meeting for a fleeting moment, her nod so subtle it might have been missed by anyone else. She stood, her heels soft against the carpet, and the room turned to her, expectant. "I read his file," she said, her voice warm but commanding, cutting through the residual chatter. "More importantly, I read between the lines. Today, he read the room." The words landed like a verdict, final and affirming, and the applause swelled again, this time with conviction. As the group dispersed, James lingered, packing his laptop with deliberate care. The whispers had faded, replaced by nods of recognition from colleagues who'd earlier doubted him. He felt the floor beneath him, solid, no longer foreign. Willow approached, her presence a quiet force. "You didn't just present data," she said, her voice low, meant only for him. "You changed their minds." James met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just doing the job," he said, but his eyes held hers, a shared understanding passing between them. She turned to leave, her silhouette framed by the city's glow, and James watched her go. The weight of his badge lighter, the path ahead clearer, forged by a moment where he'd proven not just his worth, but his place. The 28th floor of Pinnacle Tower was a fortress of glass and ambition, its sleek corridors dimming as the city beyond sank into twilight. Willow Thompson sat alone in her corner office, the weight of a brutal day pressing against her temples. Her navy blazer hung carelessly over her chair, her long black hair slipping loose from its twist, strands framing her face like shadows of exhaustion. Papers littered her obsidian desk, financial reports, investor memos, a scrawled note about a supply chain crisis, each a silent accusation of a battle still raging. The city's lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to her struggle, and the soft hum of the office's climate control was the only sound in a space that felt too vast, too empty. As CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, Willow was a titan, but tonight she was a woman fraying at the edges, her armor dented by hours of relentless pressure. She rubbed her eyes, the glow of her laptop screen blurring, when a faint clink startled her. On the desk's edge sat a white ceramic mug, steam curling gently from its surface, the delicate scent of chamomile wafting upward, her favorite. Beside it, a folded note in firm, unhurried handwriting. "You look tired. The world can wait." No signature, but she knew. James Carter. Her chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She glanced across the darkened floor, but his desk was empty, his light off. He'd left without a word, his gesture as quiet as a whisper, yet it landed like a lifeline in a storm she hadn't admitted she was weathering. The next morning, the storm broke into chaos. A critical glitch in Pinnacle's logistics platform had delayed shipments across 2 regions, sparking panic among clients and a firestorm within the company. The executive boardroom, a glass-walled arena on the 26th floor, was a battlefield of egos and accusations. Willow sat at the head of the mahogany table, her posture rigid, her navy pantsuit impeccable despite the fatigue etching faint lines around her eyes. Around her, a dozen executives, gray-haired VPs, sharp-eyed strategists, and a particularly vocal supply chain director, fired questions cloaked in professional veneer, but laced with venom. "How did this slip through?" one demanded, his pen tapping like a metronome of blame. "Is leadership aligned on risk protocols?" Another pressed, her tone implying Willow's failure was personal. Her knuckles whitened around her pen, her jaw tight, but she absorbed each barb with a composure honed by years of navigating rooms that questioned her place. The air grew thicker, the questions sharper, each one a veiled attempt to erode her authority. Willow's voice remained steady, her responses measured, data on the glitch's origin, timelines for resolution, but her eyes flickered once, a fleeting crack in her armor, visible only to someone watching closely. James Carter was that someone. Seated near the table's end, his navy blazer understated, his blue eyes alert, he'd been silent, observing the room's dynamics with the precision of a man who'd learned to read storms before they struck. He hadn't planned to speak. His role as technical strategy consultant was to analyze, not to grandstand. But that flicker in Willow's gaze, that momentary solitude stirred something deep within him, a resolve forged in his moments of being unseen. "With respect," James said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, calm but unyielding. "If we're questioning leadership, let's be accurate." The room turned, heads swiveling, some with surprise, others with thinly veiled disdain. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze steady. "Willow wasn't the bottleneck. My team missed a server flag in the platform's update cycle, and I own that." The admission was stark, unadorned, and it silenced the room, the executive's pens pausing mid-tap. He continued, his tone even but firm. "While you're pointing fingers, she's been here past midnight, rerouting shipments and drafting client apologies. Unless anyone here has logged more hours this week, I suggest we focus on fixing this, not blaming her. The silence that followed was electric, a collective inhale as the room recalibrated. The supply chain director's mouth opened, then closed, his retort dissolving under James's unflinching stare. Willow's eyes met his, a flash of gratitude softening her guarded expression, though her posture didn't waver. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice softer than usual but resonant, reclaiming the room's focus. The meeting shifted, the hostility ebbing as discussions turned to solutions, patch deployments, client communications, each voice less barbed, more collaborative. James leaned back, his role done, his presence a quiet anchor that had steadied the storm. As the executives filed out, their laptops tucked under their arms, Willow lingered, stacking papers with deliberate care, her movements masking the weight of the moment. James stood by the door, his blazer slightly rumpled, waiting. She looked up, her expression less guarded, a warmth breaking through. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice low, almost vulnerable. He shrugged, his blue eyes steady, holding a depth that spoke of shared solitude. "You were alone," he said simply. "I know what that feels like." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded, a bridge built in a single sentence. Willow crossed her arms, not in defense, but in a gesture closer to introspection. "You think showing up is enough?" she asked, her tone caught between challenge and wonder. James nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, disarming in its sincerity. "It's where everything starts." For the first time, Willow had no sharp reply, no polished deflection. She just looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a colleague, but a man whose quiet strength had shifted the room's tide without seeking credit. The glass walls reflected the city's restless pulse, but in that moment, the space between them was still, charged with an understanding that needed no further words. Willow gathered her papers, her heart a little lighter, and as she stepped toward the door, James held it open, his presence a silent promise that he'd be there, not just today, but whenever the next storm came. The grand ballroom of Pinnacle Tower shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, a constellation of light dancing across polished marble floors. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes, the murmur of laughter, and the soft strains of a string quartet weaving through the crowd. Pinnacle Innovation's 15th anniversary gala was a spectacle of triumph, a celebration of a decade and a half of innovation, attended by executives in tailored tuxedos, investors with practiced smiles, and media with flashing cameras. At the heart of it all stood Willow Thompson, CEO, a vision in a floor-length emerald gown that hugged her curves and shimmered with every movement. Her long black hair cascaded in loose waves, framing her face, her poise as commanding as ever. Yet beneath her elegant facade, a quiet exhaustion lingered, the weight of orchestrating every detail of the evening pressing against her like an unseen tide. She moved through the crowd with grace, her smile a polished mask as she greeted guests. Board members, clients, a senator with a too-firm handshake. Her makeup was flawless, her eyes bright with purpose, but the strain of weeks spent planning this night, coupled with the relentless demands of leadership, tugged at her edges. The ballroom's opulence felt surreal, a glittering dream she'd conjured but couldn't fully inhabit. Near the service doors, James Carter watched, his presence a quiet counterpoint to the chaos. Dressed in a classic black tuxedo, unadorned by flashy cufflinks or frills, he exuded a grounded elegance, his blonde hair neatly cropped, his blue eyes sharp with observation. He'd arrived hours early, ensuring the stage lighting was soft, the microphones tested, the staff coordinated. Details Willow hadn't needed to ask for, because James had seen them first. As she moved past a north-facing window, a draft from an open balcony sent a shiver down her spine, the emerald gown offering little warmth against the cool air. She barely noticed her focus on a client's anecdote, but James did. With discreet precision, he approached, a soft navy cashmere wrap in his hands. "You looked cold," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. Before she could protest, he draped the wrap over her shoulders, his fingers brushing hers briefly as he adjusted the folds, a touch so fleeting yet electric it sent a jolt through her. She glanced at him, her smile softening, but he was already stepping back, melting into the crowd, his job done without fanfare. The gala's centerpiece was moments away. The quartet's final notes faded, and a hush fell as the southwest terrace doors swung open, revealing a velvet sky primed for spectacle. Willow led the procession outside, the wrap snug around her, her gown catching the light as she stepped onto the terrace. The crowd followed, their murmurs fading into anticipation. James lingered a few steps behind, his tuxedo blending into the shadows, his eyes never straying from her. The first firework erupted, a burst of crimson that painted the sky, followed by electric blue, then a cascade of gold. Gas rose from the guests, their faces tilted upward, but Willow's gaze was fixed on the horizon, the colors reflecting in her eyes like a private galaxy. She stood alone at the terrace's edge, the wrap shielding her from the night's chill, her hands clasped tightly as if to anchor herself. The fireworks were beautiful, a triumph she'd orchestrated, but they felt distant, like a story told for someone else. James approached, his steps silent, stopping just close enough for her to feel his presence. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his, and a smile flickered, fragile but real. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of sparks. "It is," he agreed, but his gaze was on her, steady and unguarded, seeing past the gown, the title, the mask. The sky blazed with violet and silver, each burst illuminating their faces, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to dance with their unspoken thoughts. Willow's breath caught, the weight of the night loosening in his presence. "You're cold," James said, noticing the slight tremble in her shoulders. He extended his hand, palm open, an invitation rather than a demand. She hesitated, then placed both of hers in it, her fingers curling into his warmth, the contact grounding her like an anchor in a storm. They stood side by side, the fireworks a backdrop to a moment that felt infinitely more vivid. "Why do you notice the little things?" she asked, her voice soft, caught between wonder and vulnerability, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The fireworks faded for a moment, leaving only the night's gentle hum. James considered her, his blue eyes softening, holding a depth that spoke of wounds carried quietly. "Because I know what it's like when no one does," he said, his words raw, a confession offered without expectation. Her heart skipped, the truth of it landing like a spark that ignited something deep within her. She squeezed his hand, her gaze shifting back to the sky as a final burst of gold rained down, the afterglow lingering like a promise. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning beyond the moment. He returned the squeeze, his thumb brushing lightly across her fingers. "Always," he said, his voice a quiet vow. The crowd behind them erupted in applause, drawn back to the ballroom's warmth, but Willow and James lingered, their hands still joined, the night wrapping them in a stillness that felt like the edge of something new, something neither was ready to name, but both were unwilling to let go. The city's pulse thrummed through the night, its neon veins casting fleeting glows across the windshield of James Carter's modest sedan. The streets were a blur of taillights and reflections, a restless symphony of horns and distant sirens. But inside the car, a gentle quiet reigned, broken only by the soft hum of jazz drifting from the radio. James gripped the wheel with steady hands, his navy blazer discarded in the back seat, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned by a life lived partly outdoors. His blue eyes flicked occasionally to the rearview mirror, not out of habit but to check on Willow Thompson, who sat in the passenger seat, her presence a quiet force even in repose. Her car was in the shop, a rare mechanical betrayal, and James had offered to drive her home, a gesture as natural as breathing, though it carried a weight neither acknowledged aloud. Willow leaned against the headrest, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders, freed from the day's polished chignon. Her emerald blouse, slightly wrinkled, hinted at the grueling week she'd endured, endless meetings, a supply chain crisis, and the relentless scrutiny of leading pinnacle innovations. Her eyes, usually sharp with purpose, were half closed, the city's lights painting fleeting patterns across her face. Fatigue clung to her like a second skin, her breathing slow, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The radio played a mellow saxophone riff, its notes weaving through the silence, and for a moment the car felt like a sanctuary, a fragile bubble shielding them from the world's demands. James kept his focus on the road, navigating the city's arteries with ease. But his awareness of Willow was acute, a quiet vigilance honed by moments of seeing her when others didn't. The week had been brutal for her: investor disputes, a public relations snag, and the unspoken pressure of being a black woman at the helm, where every misstep was magnified. He'd watched her in meetings, her poise unbreakable, but he'd seen the cost in the faint lines around her eyes, the way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. Tonight, as they left Pinnacle Tower, her shoulders had slumped, a rare admission of weariness, and James had felt a pull to be there, not as a colleague, but as something more, something undefined. The car slowed at a red light, the city's glow softening the edges of the moment. Willow's breathing deepened, her head tilting slightly, her hair catching at the corner of her lips as she drifted into a light sleep. James glanced over, his chest tightening at the sight of her. Vulnerable, unguarded. A woman who carried a company's weight now softened by the night. A few strands of her hair danced in the breeze from the cracked window, and without thinking, he lifted a hand, his fingers hovering inches from her face. He hesitated, his heart a quiet drumbeat, aware of the line he was nearing. This wasn't infatuation, not the reckless rush of youth, but something deeper, a recognition of a soul he hadn't expected to find. Gently, so gently, he brushed the hair away, his touch lighter than a whisper, tucking it behind her ear. Willow stirred, her eyes fluttering open, catching his in the dim light. Time paused, the red light's glow bathing them in a surreal hush. Her gaze held his, soft but searching, a question unspoken in the depths of her eyes. James froze, his hand still near her cheek, a flush creeping up his neck. "Sorry," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "Your hair." He began to pull back, but her eyes didn't waver, and a faint flush warmed her cheeks, her expression caught between surprise and something warmer, something that felt like trust. "It's okay," she said, her voice a soft thread, barely audible over the jazz's fading notes. The words were simple, but they carried a weight in an acknowledgement of the moment's intimacy. The light turned green, but James didn't move. Not yet, the air between them charged with an unspoken shift. Willow's lips curved, a small, unguarded smile, and she settled back, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer before drifting to the window. The car rolled forward, the city resuming its restless dance, but inside the silence had transformed, no longer just quiet but shared, a language of glances and gestures that spoke louder than words. They reached her building, a sleek high-rise with a doorman who nodded as James pulled to the curb. He stepped out, circling to open her door, his movements deliberate, as always. Willow emerged, her blouse catching the streetlight's glow, her hair a dark cascade against her shoulders. She turned to him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen, a vulnerability she rarely allowed. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying more than gratitude, for the ride, for the moment, for seeing her in a way no one else did, for seeing people. James nodded, his hands slipping into his pockets, his blue eyes steady but warm. "Always," he said, the word a quiet promise. She climbed the steps, pausing to glance back, her silhouette framed by the building's glass doors. He stood by the car, watching until she disappeared inside, the night settling around him like a gentle exhale. The city buzzed on, indifferent, but for James, the moment lingered, a fragile thread woven into the fabric of something growing, something neither could name, but both felt, a silence that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The auditorium at Pinnacle Tower hummed with anticipation, its vast space filled with rows of industry leaders, journalists, and employees, their faces bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights. A massive screen loomed behind the stage, displaying the bold logo of Pinnacle Innovations alongside the title of Willow Thompson's championed initiative, The Second Door, Inclusive Hiring. The air crackled with the weight of a moment that had grown beyond a corporate program into a national conversation, a testament to seeing value where others saw flaws. Willow stepped onto the stage, her navy pantsuit sharp and tailored, her long black hair pinned back, framing a face that radiated both strength and warmth. As CEO, she was a beacon of authority, but today her presence carried something more. A quiet vulnerability, a story woven into her words that demanded to be heard. She gripped the podium, her eyes sweeping the crowd, taking in the sea of expectant faces. Cameras flashed, their lenses glinting like predators, but Willow's voice was steady, resonant, cutting through the murmurs. "I stand here not just as a CEO," she began, her tone deliberate, "but as someone who was given a second look, who learned that the most valuable resumes are often the ones we almost miss." The room stilled, her words a spark that ignited attention. She spoke of the second door, a program born from her conviction that talent hides in quiet places, in the gaps, the pauses, the lives that don't fit neatly into HR's checkboxes. "This isn't about charity," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "It's about recognizing value in the people who've fought to stand again, who've chosen purpose over pity." Applause erupted, a wave that rolled through the auditorium, but Willow's gaze drifted to the back, near the exit, where James Carter stood. His black blazer was understated, his blonde hair catching the light, his blue eyes fixed on her with a quiet intensity that anchored her. He hadn't sought the spotlight, hadn't asked to be on stage, but his presence was the heartbeat of her speech. She'd written it, thinking of him, of a man who'd seen her in a moment of need and changed her understanding of leadership, of kindness, of love. Her voice softened, though it carried to every corner. "This initiative began with someone who showed me what it means to see the unseen," she said, her eyes holding his. "Someone who proved that one small act can rewrite a story." The crowd clapped again, louder now, sensing the weight of her words, but James remained still, his nod so subtle it was a secret shared only with her. The cameras missed it. The crowd missed it. But Willow felt it like a pulse, a confirmation of a truth they'd built together. As the applause faded, she stepped off the stage, the certificate in her hand, a symbol of a legacy she'd fought for, but her heart was already moving toward the lobby, toward him. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Willow slipped out a side door, finding James by the lobby's wide glass windows, the city's restless glow stretching beyond. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. "You stood back," she said, her voice soft, a smile tugging at her lips. He returned it, his blue eyes warm. "I always do." She stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, the world narrowing to the space they shared. "You're the reason I stood up there tonight," she said, her tone earnest, almost urgent. He shook his head, his smile gentle. "You were always going to stand up there." Willow's breath caught, her heart a quiet drumbeat. She reached for his hand, her fingers finding his, the contact grounding her like an anchor. "I don't love you because you're kind to me," she said, her voice trembling with a truth she'd held back too long. "I love you because you're kind when no one's watching." The words hung between them, raw and unadorned, a confession that stripped away the armor she'd worn for years. James's fingers curled around hers, his gaze steady, holding a depth that needed no words. He didn't speak, but his silence was an answer, a vow etched in the way he held her hand, firm yet tender. They found themselves back at the grind, the coffee shop now quiet, its wooden tables bathed in the golden glow of hanging lights. The barista, a new face, smiled as they ordered. Willow's matcha latte, James's black coffee. Willow pulled out her card, a playful smirk dancing on her lips. "What if it's declined again?" she teased, her eyes sparkling. James leaned forward, his voice low, a twinkle in his gaze. "Then I'll scan mine. Some habits die hard." The machine beeped, approved, and they laughed, the sound light but rich, a melody of shared history. They settled at a corner table, the cups steaming between them, the world outside a soft blur. Willow's gaze softened, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "What if you hadn't been there?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, a question that reached into the heart of their story. James leaned back, thoughtful, his blue eyes steady. Kindness finds a way, he said, his words simple but profound. It just needs two people willing to see each other. She nodded, her hand reaching across the table, resting over his, the warmth of his skin, a quiet promise. This, she said, her voice trembling with certainty, was never just coffee. James's thumb brushed hers, his smile soft but sure. It was about seeing someone and choosing to stay. The shop's hum faded, the city's pulse a distant echo. Their hands remained joined, the weight of their journey, a single act of kindness grown into love, settling like a gentle tide. The future stretched before them, uncharted but hopeful, brewed in the quiet courage of two hearts that had found each other in the stillness. What did kindness over coffee stir in your heart? Did Willow and James's journey remind you of a moment when a small act changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for joining us on this tale of courage, connection, and quiet love. If their story warmed your soul, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to catch our next heartfelt adventure. Let's keep the kindness brewing. Drop a comment, share where you're listening from, and we'll see you soon for another story that touches the heart.